Well, welcome back to another exciting episode of Right Down the Street. My name is Bryan Barnett. I'm the mayor of the city of Rochester Hills and your host for this podcast. As you know, we thank our loyal listeners, but Right Down the Street is a wonderful way for us to celebrate the amazing people who are doing incredible things right down the street, in and around our community of the city of Rochester Hills, making news and hopefully, in many cases, making life for our community even better. Today, we have a really great episode. Of course, we're in the middle of Women's History Month, and today we're going to introduce you to a couple stories of some women who are doing some incredible things here in the city of Rochester Hills, some initial trailblazers in our community's past, and some current trailblazers. And to get us started, I'm really excited to introduce and welcome Ann Echols to the program today. Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
Ann is a longtime member of the Rochester Hills Fire Department, but was just named Assistant Fire Chief and Fire Marshal. You are the first woman in the history of our city to hold that title.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's never something that I really pursued. I joined the fire service because I just wanted to help serve the community and cut up some cars. And my journey has kind of taken me through all of the ranks up until assistant chief. So it's been an incredible couple weeks so far.
Yeah, so far so good, right?
So far so good.
Well, let's dive into that journey a little bit. Go take us all the way back to when in your life did you say, I think I might want to get into firefighting as a profession?
So I originally wanted to be like a doctor or a nurse or something. My parents were both teachers and very much valued education. And I went to an EMT academy right out of high school. So I graduated high school, and 2 weeks later, I started this academy at OCC. It was 8 weeks long. I got my EMT, and in it, we did a day where we cut up cars. And I was like, yep, this is what I want to do.
Seems to be a reoccurring theme
Yes,
here.
extrication. It was super cool. You can take a Sawzall and cut a car in half in 10 minutes. And so that kind of sparked the interest for me. And I started looking into paramedic schools and the fire academy and told my parents I did not want to go to college, that I wanted to go to the fire academy, and they freaked out a little. So I did go to college, got my degree, and then came back and went to the fire academy and got hired as a paid-on-call firefighter with Farmington Hills.
Okay.
So that's where I started. I spent 3 years there, and then I just started applying to cities. And luckily, Rochester Hills picked me up.
Well, lucky for us as well. What made you decide to come to Rochester Hills?
So at the time, I was applying to just anywhere. I got hired in 2006, which was the tail end of when mass hirings were being done by fire departments. So it was kind of a scramble then. But I got an offer from Livonia and an offer from Rochester Hills in the same week. I kind of took a look at the two, and Rochester Hills, the opportunity for growth. When I first started, there were only 8 people a day. And looking and seeing the expansion of the city and the building and the fire department potential, it was a good fit.
So you've been in the firefighting profession now in total for how many years?
22.
All right. That's a lot.
Yes.
How has it changed from when you started, back in the early 2000s? What's the biggest change about the profession that people might not know?
Biggest change. Probably just the call volume increasing and the types of calls.
Yeah.
My dad was very shocked that we don't sit around and just wait for fires all day. He pictured us.
It's a big misconception, right?
It is. He
there's
pictured
one
us.
or two calls a day, and the rest of the time you sit in big comfy couches and watch television.
Yep.
What's
and that
a day
was,
like?
He was upset about that.
Yeah.
A day is, yesterday they did 37 calls. So we start at 7 a.m. They check their trucks. They kind of, have a morning meeting, kind of set the day. There's some kind of training every day. They plan lunches and dinners and meals. Right now there's 5 stations, so that's happening 5 times throughout the city every day. And then they take calls when they can. So if they're in the middle of the night sleeping, if they're in the bathroom, if they're in the shower, they go. Mm-hmm. So it's a very busy day sometimes. You don't get much reprieve, it seems, these days. But
37 calls is probably a call every 40 minutes. Generally more than one an hour. And, in a city like ours, a call is not a 5-minute thing. It can be an hour or 2, or sometimes hospital visits and so forth. I mean, it's a lot involved. So very rarely are you you or the team members sitting around.
Yeah, there's not a ton of downtime.
Yeah. So obviously, in your role and in the roles you've had in the past, especially as it relates to training, you're training all the time, right? And you're training not just with your team members, but you're training with other departments from around the region. You're doing different things. I imagine that in a lot of those trainings, you are a small minority. It's sort of a male-dominated field. Talk a little bit about that. How do you
Yeah.
approach that?
It's not sort of, it is a male dominated field. I looked up some stats for this. So right now, female firefighters make up 5% of full-time firefighters. So in our department, we have myself and we just hired a female about a year ago. We make up that 5% of our current department. So we're about average. But it was when I first started, being the first female hired full-time here was interesting because, bunk rooms and training and uniforms and everything was kind of new to everybody. So I came in knowing I was going to be the first and just kind of did what every good probie does, keep your head down, keep your mouth closed for a year and just show them what you got.
Mm-hmm. Well, you must have shown them a lot because you have risen to the ranks higher than any female in the history of our organization. What would you tell a young girl who's 10 or 11 who's watching this or listening to this and says, that sounds kind of cool. I wonder how I would get into that. What would you tell them?
Yeah. Go for it. It's like any job, right? You got to do some research. One of the struggles for me growing through my career so far was becoming a mom. I didn't have children and I wasn't married when I was hired. I had children, so doing 24-hour shifts was a bit of a struggle. But you just got to make it work.
How'd you do it? How'd you manage it?
Parents. My parents live a block away,
Okay.
and they helped in the morning because my husband would leave at 6 a.m. and I wouldn't get home until 8 a.m. from shift. So that weird 2-hour window, you can't just take him to daycare from 6 to 8. So they would come over every day and help out, and they still help out, which is great. But yeah, if anyone, girl or boy, wants to get into it, just do it.
Now, you mentioned your kids. The fire service has a very unique tradition. When you are promoted, there's a pinning ceremony. We got to witness that last month, I believe. Who pinned you, and why did you pick that person to pin you?
So both of my kids kind of pinned me. This time it was my younger son, George. But I picked them because they have pinned me in every ceremony. So I have a picture of them from 11 or so years ago when I became a lieutenant, with them standing next to me and they both pinned me. I have a picture from 3 years ago when I became a captain that they both pinned me, and we have a picture of that. And so going forward, they will pin me every time.
No worries about that. They're pretty good pinners at this point.
Pretty good pinners, yeah.
It's always a nervous moment because it is an actual pin, and
Yes.
Everybody's nervous in that moment.
Yes, yeah. He had trouble with the clasp, but he practiced ahead of time. He got it. It was good.
What's it like being? I know a little bit of this because I think I was raised in a firefighting family. My father was a firefighter in WBFD over in West Bloomfield, and I know what it's like to have parents that miss sporting events, and my dad would work really hard to trade days and get things, but we'd be sitting at dinner and he'd be gone, or he'd get a call. What's it like being a mom and a leader in a pretty active fire department? How do you balance all that?
Yeah. So currently it's a little bit easier than being on 24s. I work 4 or 5 8-hour days. So I'm home by 5 every day, and I do have the flexibility with, vacation or time off that I can take. But because when they were born, I was already on 24-hour days, that's all they've known. And so they know that mom is home more now. As a chief, I don't have to leave too often or take too many phone calls here and there, but I'm there for all their sporting events. They're doing all the sports right now. I'm home on the weekends now, which is nice for them because I wasn't before. But same thing, like you do trades, our guys are really good. Like, hey, you have little kids, go home and experience, fun little kid things. And they'll swap you a couple hours on holidays in the morning just so you can be present.
Sure. In your career, obviously, you've probably had some mentors and some people both in the profession and out of the profession. But as we're in Women's History Month, were there any women that played significant roles in your life that you recognize were mentors or models for you?
My initial thought would be no. But, I think my mom was a big rock for me. She was there growing up. My parents, like I said, were both teachers.
Mm-hmm.
She stopped teaching when they adopted me and my brother. And she didn't go back to teaching until my brother was in middle school. So she was always there. And she just encouraged me to just go do it. Just, be yourself and get after whatever you want. Yeah.
I get the impression, because I think this is true with a lot of people who find themselves as trailblazers just because they're doing something that they love. But does it strike you that you are probably a mentor to a lot of people who are watching you, whether you realize it or not? And how do you react to that?
Yeah. So in my executive fire officer program at the National Fire Academy, we had this conversation because in my last class, 5 of the 25 students were women, which is unheard of in really any fire class. And we had a lot of discussions about the importance of just being there and being a symbol, right? And I've never looked to be that symbol, but I would see it when I first started. I'd be driving the trucks, and you'd be driving by, and you'd see these little old ladies who they'd give you these thumbs up, or they'd high five you in a store, or a lot of older women would come up and tell me, they would be like, I think it's great that you're doing this because I couldn't. They literally weren't allowed to do it. So that kind of just representation matters. And not that I sought it out or, seek it out now, but I do know that what I'm doing and people who see me, my circle of influence is limitless, and I don't know who I'm helping.
Yeah, hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you are so public facing when you are, not just in your formal role, but when you're in uniform at a grocery store or, at the bank or wherever it might be. There are people going, that's cool. That's really cool. And especially when they see Chief on your uniform, that has to be a good feeling. Firefighting obviously is a time-honored, wonderful profession, but from someone who's been doing it for so long, again, always looking to encourage more people to get into the profession. What is the best part of your job?
I would say the people, all the people that I've met, all the people that I've helped, the people that have come up to me later and been like, hey, you were on that call and I remember you. Just every day is so different and you meet so many people. One of the projects for my class, I had to go into the community and talk to people that I've never talked to before. And I had a hard time doing that because we have so many connections and we have so many, positive stories and groups and companies out there. I couldn't find anybody that I hadn't talked to yet. So yeah, just the everyday interactions.
Well, that is, in a profession, both police and fire, that seem to, constantly be under a little bit of attack. Harder to find people to get into those. Used to be family traditions of so many generations. It would be police officers or firefighters. It is absolutely wonderful to see you lead not just your kids, but the community's kids, boys and girls, to see what is possible in terms of profession and careers, and you've absolutely blazed a trail, following in the lead of many female trailblazers in this community. We're going to hear from Samantha in just a few minutes about some of our community's foremothers, I guess we should say, and the trails that they've blazed. They certainly would be, I'm sure, very proud of you, Chief Echols. We always end with one question.
Okay.
And you didn't get this one, so you have no idea what this is. We ask all of our guests the same question, and it's a two-parter.
Okay.
If you could have lunch with any person, alive or past, who would it be, and where would you have it?
Ooh. So I'd probably pick Einstein. Yes, more for my dad. My dad was he taught AP Physics and AP Calculus.
Okay.
So I heard a lot about Einstein growing up and all of his
I
theories
thought you
and
meant
science.
Einstein bagels. I'm thinking, wow, that's a very normal place to pick. But
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
Einstein the person, Albert Einstein.
Yes, okay.
But we could maybe go to Einstein Bagels and see how he likes it.
Writes
I don't know.
itself.
Yeah, the place, I have no idea.
But
No
you don't
idea.
get to skip out on that answer. You have to pick a place.
Ugh.
You got Albert Einstein, and you're going to have a
I got
conversation.
Albert Einstein.
Where's it going to be?
I don't know. Let's see.
I mean, I guess it could be Einstein.
I mean, it
bagels.
could be Einstein
It
bagels.
would work. He'd think
That'd
that would
be-
be funny, I assume.
Probably. He was a bit of a jokester. I don't know.
Well, it'd be someplace you should be able to bring your dad to, because obviously if it was for him,
Yeah.
it'd be good to have a table for 3.
He likes the Dearborn Inn, and I hear that's reopening.
Okay.
So
Well, there we go.
we'll go there.
We'll get it just in the reopening. Well, listen, Einstein is the first time we've had that answer. That would be a wild and really interesting conversation. And this has been as well. And I appreciate you. We've had the chance to work together for a long time, and you are the epitome of professionalism, leadership, and really representing the RHFD in an exceptional way. And this Women's History Month, we congratulate you. Thank you for trailblazing and set a great example for all of the folks at home, especially young girls who are out there going, could I be a firefighter? Yes, you can. And you can't just be a firefighter. You can also be the chief. And that's what Chief Echols is telling us and is showing us by her leadership. So thank you, Chief Echols, for being here today and for all of your leadership. We appreciate the trail that you are blazing for so many here in our community, and of course, for keeping us safe. Thank you. And now we're going to meet and hear about another amazing group of women who have been leading and have led in our community for so many years, putting us on this path of supporting so many incredible females throughout our community's history. Samantha Lawrence is here to tell us a little bit about some of the amazing women in our community's past. So we're continuing our celebration of Women's History Month here in the city of Rochester Hills, and excited to welcome Samantha Lawrence to the program today. Samantha, you are the city's archivist, a position you've had, at least been with the city for the past 9 years. Archivist is kind of an interesting word. Some people are probably watching at home going, exactly what that is. Some people are probably like, what does that mean? So tell us, what does an archivist do?
Yeah, that's a big part of my job. I feel like it's explaining what I do. People get me confused with like an archaeologist or an architect, but I always say that my job is to collect, protect, and share the thousands of items we have at the museum. So we have historical items related to Rochester and Rochester Hills, and my job is to make sure that they're around for future generations. So I get to wear a lot of hats with that, which is pretty fun.
And just out of curiosity, how does one get into that field? Do you go to school specifically for that?
Yeah, typically. So there's a few different ways to get into it. The way I went is I got a master's in library and information science, and I did kind of an archival concentration. And then I just started volunteering and working at local archives and museums and ended up at the museum.
Well, we're glad you're here, and you've been, our museum is an absolute treasure. We've had Pat McKay on the program before to talk about some of the history of our community, but today specifically we want to really focus on what really is a great story for the city, and that is some of the amazing women who have been absolute leaders from jump here in what of course back then was Avon Township, and not just here, but we're really sort of regional, statewide, and global leaders in the professions. And we can't hardly start without first talking about Bertha, Bertha Van Heusen and Sarah Van Heusen Jones, probably the two greatest names in our city's history. Many people know them, but for those that don't, give us a thumbnail sketch of those two women and why they're so outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with Dr. Bertha Van Heusen. She's like our famous local surgeon. She was born back in 1863. She grew up in Stony Creek Village, where the museum site is now. And she went on to the University of Michigan. This was, of course, at a time when women weren't going to college. And she started studying literature, changed her major to medicine. It was a decision her family wasn't super happy with, but she was determined, and she graduated and made a name for herself. Her primary practice was in Chicago, but she traveled all over the world. She had what she called her surgical daughters, so other women that she was mentoring in the medical field, and that really became her legacy. She helped found the American Medical Women's Association in 1915, I believe it was. And so she was, really interested in her profession, but also helping those, who are coming after her. And then her niece, Sarah Van Hoosen Jones, I always say that I think the biggest impact that Bertha had was on Sarah. So her niece was born in 1892, and she was raised by the women in her life. Unfortunately, both her father and her grandfather passed away by the time she was 5 years old. But when it came time for her to decide what she wanted to do with her life, they kind of expected her to become a doctor, but she wanted to become a farmer. So she went to the University of Wisconsin. She had PhD in animal genetics, and she came back to Avon Township, took over her family's farm, and made it into the Van Hoosen Farm, a very successful dairy operation.
Yeah. You think about both of those stories, and the commonalities is both for Bertha and for Sarah, they went into pretty male-dominated fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
There probably weren't a lot of female farmers, and there certainly weren't at the time a lot of female doctors. What's it take to make a decision like that, to say this is kind of what society says you should be doing, but I'm going to do something different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I admire the most about them is they made these really hard decisions. Bertha talks about how when she was deciding what she wanted to do, she sat on a couch that was in the farmhouse, and we still have it on display. And she just sat there and decided, she wanted to go into medicine. And I mentioned that it was something her family didn't approve of. They knew she was going to face so many obstacles, and she did. She had to really make a name for herself and earn respect. So it was just kind of, fighting for a place in that field. And then, Sarah, I think her passion started when she was young. She would spend her summers on her grandparents' farm. And so I think it was kind of an easier decision for her. And surprisingly, I think because she had such an extensive education, she didn't really deal with a lot of gender discrimination, which was fantastic. But she really knew her stuff.
Yeah. We just had Chief Echols on as well, and a similar story where I think she bucked her family's desire. They assumed she'd go in this direction, and she said, "I really want to look at the fire service." Same with these two ladies. Certainly they weren't, saying you should be a doctor or you should go back and be a farmer, but they made such an amazing impact. I mean, to think that the American Medical Women's Association was founded by someone in this community in 1915 is exceptional. I mean, that has ramifications, and so many people. I think there's an award in her honor that's given every year because of her leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that I think people are always surprised about when they learn their story. And it's just so wonderful to be able to tell people, these local people made a huge difference, and you can too. It's always fun when we get to tell, the local school groups about them, because it's a local figure that they can look up to.
Sure. Now, Samantha, give us a color to this, because certainly there are still tremendous barriers in society in certain fields for women, but nothing like there were 100 years ago.
Right.
Share with us what that must have been like to, for women in the late 1800s and early 1900s, when they weren't yet allowed to vote in many cases, and education was something that oftentimes was held back or discouraged. Give us a little flavor for what that must have been like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with Dr. Bertha, we see it a lot. She had to get really creative with, how she made her opportunities. And I think that, she had so much determination. But I think women really just had to make an identity for themselves. Like we see when we look back at the newspapers, there was probably into the 1800s, they were usually called, Mrs. Their husband's name. So it was usually they had to kind of make their name for themselves. So yeah, it was definitely a struggle, but we see women kind of break out of these molds and start to make an impact on our community.
Yeah. Let me ask about you a little bit. I mean, obviously you have a little bit of a unique field. Who are some of your mentors that kind of inspired you, especially any women in your life that may have sort of set you on this path to put you where you are today?
Yeah, so I would say my love of history probably comes from my mom. She is a big like history lover. She loves old houses, that kind of thing. And then it was really just the different professors and women that I met kind of throughout my career. I went to Oakland University,
Yes.
and I studied English there. And it was in my senior year that I decided to do an internship in their archives, and that opened me up to the world of archives, which was really fantastic. And there was a few people there that, just asking their guidance and kind of, like, how do I get to where you are? That really helped me kind of along my way. And then, nowadays I feel like my biggest role models are the Van Hoosens, which is kind of, it's kind of silly, but I love it. We have their wonderful autobiographies that we can kind of look back from and,
Sure.
and, be inspired by.
And because you have such a unique peek at the history in such a wonderful way. Any other interesting stories of women in our community's past that would be interesting to folks that have kind of been formative?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I like to do when I talk about some of our women's history is to talk about kind of how we discover that. So in the archives, unfortunately, everything isn't just laid out. We don't always have, really wonderful autobiographies. So it's a lot of digging, it's a lot of research. And I discovered this one woman. Her name was May Axford. And I was going through the newspapers. Usually it happens where you're researching one topic and you find something completely different. And I kept coming across these articles about May Axford's beloved cactus plants. And they were these night blooming cactus plants that bloomed one night a year. And it became from like 1908 through I think the 1940s. The newspapers chronicled her plants, and she would invite the community over to her house. And it was one of those stories that it wasn't the most impactful, but it introduced me to a new woman. And then it turns out May was super active in the community. She was a part of the local Red chapter or Red Cross chapter for 22 consecutive years.
Wow.
She was a part of 8 different local organizations, and she's a quilter. She made over 100 quilts in her lifetime. So it was just kind of a fun roundabout way to learn about a new woman in our community.
I think the flower that blooms one night a year, isn't that? I think that's in Crazy Rich Asians too. I think they have that same
Is it?
flower. There's something about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I always find that true. When you start to study something, especially history, in this community, it's so rich and vibrant. There's always some side stories that you're like, I didn't know that they were related or that they lived at the same time. And then you start to see the names of the streets around here and where they
Right.
came from and the families. And we're so blessed to have so many people who have given so much, which allow us really to celebrate what we celebrate. And I know you
Absolutely.
are kind of putting together a lecture series on that. Is that right?
Yeah. So I created a lecture. It's called What She Left Behind. And I basically uncover, stories of Rochester's women. And it's fun because I get to add that archival twist. So I get to talk about how I'm uncovering these stories, how we're working to preserve them. And I'm doing 2 presentations of that at the Macomb. It's Macomb's Lorenzo Cultural Center.
Okay.
So I'm doing it April 11th and April 23rd, which is really exciting.
That's awesome. April 11th, April 23rd. It's called
What She Left Behind.
What She Left Behind.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for all your work. Thank you for uncovering great stories and continuing the legacy of so many amazing women in our community who have whose shoulders on which we all stand. The museum is a great physical reminder, but you finding those stories to just share and challenge us and certainly young women in our community, I think is really exceptional. We always end, Samantha, this podcast with one question for every member who appears with us, and there's no prep for this, so it's kind of your gut reaction, but it's a 2-parter. If you could have lunch with any individual, alive or past, who would it be, and where would you have it?
I don't think this is going to come as a surprise. I would have lunch with Sarah Van Hoosen Jones in the Van Hoosen farmhouse.
That is really, really perfect and seen. I mean, that is right on cue. That would be, first of all, the house looks a lot the same.
Yeah.
She'd probably be pretty pumped that she'd recognize a lot of the furniture and the
Yeah.
books and so forth because you and your team have done such a great job. But what an amazing lunch and experience that would be to get to meet and chat with her. Well, same for me. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me today, and for hopefully challenging some folks out there to explore the museum. Come and stop by the Van Heusen's old house. You're still welcome by to learn more. Catch that lecture series if you get a chance. We have a lot of programming that talks about the people that have been huge players here, but especially this one called What She Left Behind, celebrating the amazing women who've been a part of this community's past. Well, thank you for tuning in to another exciting episode of Right Down the Street. As always, we are so grateful to you, our loyal followers. Continue to stay with us as we bring you the incredible stories of the people making a difference and changing the world right down the street. Until next time, God bless.